Liam Hayes stood in the brightly lit aisle of the grocery store, a carton of organic milk in his hand. The air was cool and smelled vaguely of refrigerated produce and fresh bread. He was examining the expiration date, a small, mundane task in a life he had deliberately made small and mundane, when he heard his wife's voice. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat, but this time, it carried a cadence that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. It was her social voice, the one polished with a brittle, airy confidence he had come to associate with her family. He was just one aisle over, separated by a towering wall of colorful cereal boxes. He could have called out to her, let her know he was there, but something in her tone held him in place, a sudden statue in the river of weekend shoppers. "I know, Amelia, I know," Clara was saying. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial murmur, yet it sliced through the background hum of shopping carts and beeping scanners. "It's just exhausting sometimes." Liam stood perfectly still, the cold of the milk carton seeping into his palm. He could picture her perfectly, leaning against her cart, one manicured hand gesturing dismissively, her phone pressed to her ear. He could see the slight frown that would be pulling at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. "No, he's a good man," she conceded, and the caveat felt like a slap. It was the kind of thing you said about a loyal dog or a reliable but unexciting car. He's kind, he's steady, but my God, there's just no ambition, no spark. My parents were right. There was a pause, a sigh that Liam felt in his own chest. Honestly, if I'm being brutally honest with you, I married down. I married so far down I'm practically drilling for oil. The words hung in the air, invisible and yet heavier than anything Liam had ever carried. They were not shouted in anger or hissed in a fight. They were spoken calmly, as a statement of fact to a friend, an indisputable truth of her life. He felt a strange, chilling detachment, as if he were floating near the ceiling, looking down at the man in the simple jeans and gray t-shirt holding a carton of milk. He saw that man's shoulders, which had carried the weight of designing multi-million-dollar projects, slump just a fraction of an inch. Clara laughed, a short, sharp, unhappy sound. "Oh, don't even. Tonight at dinner, my father will ask him about his drafting, and Liam will just smile that placid smile of his. And I'll have to sit there and pretend I'm not just screaming on the inside. I wanted a partner to conquer the world with. Instead, I got a man who's content to just exist in it." He didn't know I was behind her at the store. He thought about that sentence. He thought about the vast, cavernous space between what she saw and who he was. She saw a simple draftsman, a man earning a modest hourly wage at a small architectural firm, a man who was content with their small apartment and their 10-year-old car. She saw a man who had peaked, or perhaps had never even had a peak to begin with. She didn't know that the small firm was one he had quietly acquired 6 months ago as a holding company. She didn't know that his modest wage was a fiction, a number on a pay stub he had generated for the sake of appearances while he decided what to do next. She didn't know that for the last 2 years, her unambitious husband had been decompressing from selling his own legendary design firm, a company whose name was whispered with reverence in the circles she so desperately wanted to enter, for a sum of money that would make her father's entire net worth look like a rounding error. She didn't know that the man she thought was drilling for oil had already struck a well so deep it could swallow her entire world. Within 3 weeks, she and her entire family would learn the truth in the most public and dramatic way imaginable. The humiliation she felt for him would be turned back on her with the force of a tidal wave. But for now, he just stood in the grocery aisle, the milk carton growing heavy, a quiet man listening to the casual demolition of his marriage. It's a crazy story, I know, but it's one that needed to happen. Before we get into how it all fell apart and then how it was rebuilt, do me a favor. If you enjoy stories about the underdog finally getting their moment, hit that like button. and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. I'm always curious where these stories land, so drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far a single moment, a single overheard sentence can travel. Now, let's go back to that silent car ride home. The drive back to their apartment was a masterclass in silence. Liam placed the grocery bags in the trunk with methodical care, the clinking of glass jars sounding unnaturally loud in the tense quiet of the parking garage. He closed the trunk with a soft click. Clara was already in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, the screen's blue light casting an artificial glow on her face, making her a stranger. She didn't look up as he got in and started the engine. The 10-year-old sedan, a car her father, Richard, often referred to as that little tin can, hummed to life. Liam had kept it because it was unassuming, because it didn't draw attention, and because a small, sentimental part of him remembered buying it with Clara a decade ago, when they were both young and the car had felt like a magnificent chariot carrying them toward a shared future. Now it just felt like another exhibit in the prosecution's case against him. "Did you get the almond milk for my coffee?" Clara asked without looking up from her phone. Her tone was flat, distracted. "I got the oat milk," Liam replied, his own voice steady, betraying none of the seismic shifts happening within him. "They were out of the almond milk you like." "Oh," a small, disappointed puff of air. "Okay." Silence again. The car moved through the city streets, past buildings of glass and steel, monuments to the kind of ambition she craved. Liam knew the bones of half of them. He knew which ones had foundational flaws, which ones used inferior steel, which ones were architectural poems. He had spent his life learning the language of structures, how to make them strong, beautiful, enduring. It was a bitter irony that he had failed so spectacularly to do the same with his own marriage. The foundation was cracked, the facade was crumbling, and he had only just realized it. He glanced at her. She was beautiful. Even now, with her face tight with a dissatisfaction she probably wasn't even aware of, her beauty was a fact. It was what had first drawn him to her at a university mixer all those years ago. She'd been vibrant, funny, a bright flame of energy. He had been a quiet, intense architectural student, more comfortable with blueprints than with people. She had pulled him out of his shell, and he had grounded her. It had seemed like a perfect balance, but somewhere along the way, the balance had tipped. Her family's influence, their relentless obsession with wealth and status, had been like water seeping into stone, freezing and thawing until the cracks were too deep to ignore. "I married down." The words echoed in the enclosed space of the car. He wondered what Amelia had said on the other end of the line. Probably something placating, something like, "Oh, Clara, don't say that." But she would be thinking it was true. They all thought it was true. When they arrived at their apartment building, a clean, respectable, but entirely unremarkable three-story walk-up, Liam began unloading the groceries. Clara swiped her key fob and headed inside, calling over her shoulder, "My hands are full," as she clutched her phone and her designer handbag. Liam watched her go, then turned back to the car and gathered the 4 heavy bags, his knuckles straining. It was a perfect, tiny metaphor for their entire relationship. Her hands were always full. His were always carrying the load. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual. It was a space he had once loved. He had chosen it for the large windows that flooded the main room with afternoon light. He had refinished the hardwood floors himself, a task he'd found meditative. He had built the bookshelves that lined the far wall, filling them with his and her books, a testament to their once shared intellectual life. But now he saw it through her eyes. He saw the furniture that was comfortable, but not from a designer showroom. He saw the kitchen with appliances that were functional, but not state-of-the-art. He saw a life that was, in her words, content to just exist. As he put the groceries away, a task he always performed with an architect's sense of order, he felt a cold resolve solidifying in his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound and aching clarity. The last 2 years of his life, this period of quiet decompression, had been an experiment. He had wanted to know if he could be loved for the man he was, not for the name he had built or the money he had made. He wanted to strip everything away and see what remained. And now he had his answer. What remained was not enough. His gaze fell upon a worn, leather-bound journal on the small desk in the corner of the living room. It looked like a simple sketchbook, its cover softened with age. To Clara, it was just another one of his little hobbies, a place where he doodled buildings. She had no idea that journal contained the preliminary sketches, the foundational ideas for the Meridian Spire, the most ambitious and exclusive architectural project the city had seen in a century. It also contained the signed transfer of ownership documents, making him the sole, anonymous owner of the entire development. He walked over and ran his fingers over the soft leather. This was his secret. This was his power. And the woman who had just declared her marriage a failure had absolutely no idea it was sitting in plain sight, 10 feet from where she was now kicking off her expensive shoes. He had been patient. He had been humble. But patience had been mistaken for passivity and humility for weakness. The experiment was over. It was time to present the results. The dreaded family dinner was 2 nights later. Liam knew the script by heart. It was a play that had been performed a dozen times, and he was always cast in the same role, the well-meaning but ultimately disappointing son-in-law. The setting was always Richard and Eleanor's house, a sprawling, ostentatiously modern mansion that felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home. It was all white walls, sharp angles, and vast expanses of glass overlooking a meticulously manicured lawn where nothing dared to grow out of place. It was a house built to impress, not to comfort, a perfect reflection of its owners. As they pulled up in their sedan, parking it discreetly down the street as Clara always insisted, Liam felt the familiar knot of tension tighten in his stomach. Clara was already adjusting her armor, straightening her silk blouse, and giving him a critical once-over. "Did you have to wear that shirt?" she asked, her voice tight. It was a perfectly good button-down, charcoal gray, clean and pressed. "It just looks so drab." "It's a shirt, Clara," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. "It's a statement, Liam. Everything is a statement." Inside, the air was chilled to a precise temperature and smelled of expensive, minimalist floral arrangements. Eleanor, Clara's mother, greeted them with air kisses that landed an inch from their cheeks. She was a tall, unnervingly thin woman whose face was a smooth, unmoving mask of cosmetic precision. Her smile never reached her eyes, which were constantly scanning, evaluating, and judging. "Clara, you look divine," she said, her eyes flicking to Liam for a microsecond before dismissing him entirely. Liam. The name was an acknowledgement, not a greeting. Richard was holding court in the living room, a cavernous space dominated by a grotesque, abstract sculpture that Liam knew for a fact had cost more than their apartment. Richard was a big man, florid and loud, who had inherited a successful manufacturing business and had mistaken that luck for genius. He clapped Liam on the shoulder with a heartiness that was meant to feel welcoming, but was actually a display of physical dominance. "The draftsman," he boomed, a wide, insincere smile on his face. "Still drawing your little lines and boxes?" "Something like that, Richard," Liam replied, his own smile polite and impenetrable. He could feel Clara tense up beside him. This was the part she hated, the part where she felt the hot shame of his perceived inadequacy. They sat down to dinner at a long, polished black table that could have seated 20. Tonight there were only 4 of them, and the distance between them felt vast. The conversation, as always, orbited around the son of Richard's world. His business deals, the politicians he knew, the exclusive clubs he belonged to. Liam was expected to be a silent, appreciative audience. "Close the deal on the Henderson property today," Richard announced, slicing into a piece of steak with aggressive precision. The fools were practically giving it away. You have to know when to strike, you see. It's all about leverage, Liam. You wouldn't know about that in your line of work, but in the real world, it's kill or be killed. I'm sure it's very exciting, Liam said, taking a sip of water. He had once orchestrated a hostile takeover of a rival design firm that was 10 times the size of Richard's Henderson deal. He had done it so quietly and efficiently that the board didn't know what had happened until he was sitting at the head of their table. Eleanor chimed in, her voice like the clinking of ice in a glass. We were at the club yesterday, and Cynthia Albright was there. Her daughter just married that tech billionaire, you know. He just bought them a summer home in the Hamptons. Can you imagine? She looked pointedly at Clara, a silent question hanging in the air. Why can't this be you? Clara shifted in her seat, her fork making a small, sharp sound against her plate. That's nice for them, Mom. It's more than nice, dear. It's security. It's a certain kind of life. The main course of the humiliation arrived, as it always did, with dessert. Richard leaned back, swirling the brandy in his snifter. So, Liam, tell me, what's the grand plan? You've been at this little firm for what, 2 years now? Are you ever going to, make a move? Start your own thing? Or is this it for you? It was a direct challenge, a verbal glove thrown across the polished table. Liam could feel Clara's pleading gaze on him. Say something. Invent something. Don't just sit there and smile. He placed his hands on the table, calm and steady. He looked directly at Richard, meeting his condescending gaze. I'm quite content where I am, Richard. I find the work grounding. Richard let out a short, barking laugh. Grounding? The boy wants to be grounding. Clara, your husband is a philosopher. You hear that? He's not interested in building an empire. He's interested in being grounding. Eleanor tittered, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Clara's face was a mask of mortification. She wouldn't look at him. She was staring at her plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. I'm married down, she had said. Standing in her parents' monument to materialism, watching them dismantle her husband for sport, Liam finally understood the pressure that had formed those words. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a reason. They had taught her that a person's worth was measured in dollars, in square footage, in brand names. They had given her a calculator instead of a heart. He felt a strange sort of pity for her, but it was quickly eclipsed by a harder, colder emotion. She had made her choice. She had chosen their side. She had failed to defend him, not because she was weak, but because on some fundamental level, she agreed with them. As he drove them home later, Clara was silent for a long time. The streetlights flashed across her face, illuminating the tear tracks on her cheeks. Why do you let them do that? She finally whispered, her voice choked. Do what? Liam asked, his voice neutral. Talk to you like that. Why don't you ever defend yourself? Why do you just sit there and let him call you a boy? Liam kept his eyes on the road. What would you like me to say to him, Clara? Should I tell him about the theoretical stress loads on his unsupported glass staircase? Should I mention that his entire house is an architectural cliché? Would that make you feel better? Don't be sarcastic, she snapped. You could at least act like you have some ambition. Tell him you have a plan. Lie, for God's sake. Lie, he repeated softly. The word felt profound. She didn't want him to be more. She wanted him to seem more. It was all about the performance. And he had been refusing to play his part. Yes, lie. Is that so hard? So you can have some dignity? My dignity, Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, is not determined by your father's opinion of my career, Clara. I know exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. The question is, do you? She recoiled as if he had struck her. She had no answer. The rest of the drive was shrouded in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on them, crushing what little was left of their shared space. When they got home, he went straight to his desk and opened the leather journal. He didn't look at the sketches. He looked at the numbers, the timelines, the final asset transfers, the cold, hard, irrefutable facts of his other life, the life that was about to collide with this one. A week later, Clara came home, buzzing with an energy Liam hadn't seen in years. It was a brittle, anxious excitement that set his teeth on edge. She threw her purse on a chair and began pacing their small living room, her heels clicking in agitated rhythm on the hardwood floors he had so carefully restored. "You are not going to believe the opportunity that has come up," she announced, her eyes bright with the fever of social climbing. "The Athertons, you know, from my old PR firm, they're on the board of the new Children's Hospital charity drive, and the big gala this year is at the Meridian Spire." Liam looked up from the book he was reading. The Meridian Spire. Of course. The name of his secret project, his silent masterpiece, sounded alien coming from her lips. "It's the inaugural event," she continued breathless. "The first time anyone gets to see the inside. Everyone who is anyone is going to be there. The guest list is impossible to get on, but Jessica Atherton said she can get us 2 tickets. Can you believe it?" "And why would we go to that?" Liam asked, his tone measured. Clara stopped pacing and stared at him, incredulous. "Why would we go? Liam, are you serious? This is not just a party. This is the event of the year. My father has been trying for months to get a meeting with the owners of the Spire. He wants to move his corporate headquarters there. Being seen at this gala, making connections, it could be huge for him. For us. For us." The word was a joke. She meant for her family's status. He was just the necessary accessory, the tuxedo-clad prop she had to drag along. "It sounds expensive," he said, deliberately prodding her. Her face fell, the excitement instantly draining away to be replaced by familiar frustration. "Well, yes, of course it's expensive. The tickets are $5,000 each. It's for charity." $10,000, Clara. We don't have $10,000 to spend on a party." This was the game, the life he was pretending to live. He had to play his role convincingly, right up to the end. "I know that," she snapped, her voice rising. "But we could, I don't know, put it on the credit card. My father could help us. It's an investment, Liam. Don't you understand the concept of an investment?" "I understand it perfectly," he said, his voice quiet. He thought of the 9-figure sum sitting in a trust, an amount he hadn't touched, an amount she couldn't even fathom. "And this sounds like a poor one." Her face crumpled. This was the moment he had seen coming, the convergence of her aspirations and his feigned reality. "This is what I'm talking about," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. "This is it, right here. Any other man would jump at this chance. Any other man would see the opportunity, but you just see the cost. You see the obstacle. You don't have a single ambitious bone in your body." She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I just want a different life," she sobbed. "Is that so wrong? I want to be in those rooms. I want to be part of that world. And I feel like you are an anchor, holding me back, chaining me to this mediocrity." Anchor, the word struck him. He had thought he was being her foundation, her quiet support. She saw him as a weight drowning her. The pain of it was sharp, but it was also clarifying. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the unremarkable street below. He could end it right now. He could open his laptop, show her the bank statements, the deeds, the architectural awards he'd won under a pseudonym. He could shatter her world with a few keystrokes. But the thought brought him no satisfaction. A private revelation would be too easy. She would be shocked, apologetic, and then, inevitably, ecstatic. She would have gotten what she wanted, the wealth, the status, without ever having to confront the ugliness of how she had treated him to get there. Her parents would pivot instantly, their condescension turning to sycophantic praise. No, No one would learn anything. Justice, he thought, required a different kind of architecture. It needed to be built in public. The humiliation had been private, contained within their relationship and her family. The vindication, therefore, had to be public. She needed to see him through the world's eyes, through the eyes of the very people she so desperately wanted to impress. Only then would the lesson be etched, not just on her memory, but on her character. He turned from the window. Clara was still crying softly on the couch. He felt a pang of the old love, the instinct to go to her, to comfort her. He suppressed it. That man was gone, burned away in the heat of her casual cruelty in the grocery store aisle. "All right," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We'll go." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What?" "We'll go to the gala," he repeated. "You're right. It's an investment. We'll find a way." A slow, watery smile spread across her face. Relief and triumph warred in her expression. "Oh, Liam, thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. This is going to change everything for us." He met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Yes," he said softly, "I think it will." Later that evening, long after Clara had gone to bed, dreaming of gowns and glamour, Liam sat at his desk. He dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, crisp and alert even late at night. "Marcus." "Liam, I was wondering when you'd surface," said Marcus Thorne, his former business partner and one of the few people on earth who knew the full truth of his situation. "Getting tired of your sabbatical?" "Something like that," Liam said. He could hear the faint sound of jazz in the background of Marcus's call. "Listen, I need a favor. The Children's Hospital Gala at the Spire." "Ah, yes, the great unveiling. I'm on the host committee. What about it?" "I'm coming," Liam said, "with my wife. But I need to remain off the official guest list. I want to arrive as a nobody. I want to be just another face in the crowd." There was a pause. Marcus was sharp. He could read between the lines better than anyone. "I see, a theatrical entrance, or rather, a non-entrance. Is it finally time for the third act?" "It's time," Liam confirmed. "Consider it done. You'll be on my personal list, invisible to everyone else. Is there anything else you need? The penthouse is ready for you, by the way. The decorators finished last week. It's spectacular, if I do say so myself. You really outdid yourself with the design." Liam looked around his small, quiet apartment. The life he had built here, the lie he had lived, suddenly felt like a dream he was about to wake from. "Just one more thing, Marcus. Have my car delivered to the venue, the Aston Martin, and have a driver waiting for my wife for her ride home." Another pause, longer this time. Marcus let out a low whistle. "So it's that kind of night. Understood. I'll make the arrangements. Liam, are you sure about this?" Liam thought of the words, "I'm married" down. He thought of his father-in-law's booming laugh. He thought of his wife's tears of frustration. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, and hung up the phone. The night of the gala arrived under a canopy of bruised purple clouds, threatening a storm that mirrored the one brewing in Liam's own life. The air was electric with it. Clara had been in a state of frenzied preparation for days. A new dress had been purchased, a shimmering silver sheath that cost more than their monthly rent, along with shoes and a clutch to match. She had spent the entire afternoon at a salon, and she emerged looking flawless, like a sculpture carved from ice and ambition. As Liam stood in their bedroom fastening the cufflinks on his tuxedo, he felt a strange sense of calm. The tuxedo was one he had owned for years, a classic, impeccably tailored piece from his former life. It fit him like a second skin. When Clara saw him, she stopped short. "Wow," she said, her eyes widening slightly. "You clean up well." It was meant as a compliment, but it landed with the familiar sting of a backhanded remark. The implication was clear. His normal state was one of needing to be cleaned up. "You look beautiful, Clara," he said, and he meant it. She was a vision of the woman he had fallen in love with, the bright, sparkling girl who commanded every room she entered. But now, the sparkle was harder, more desperate. The taxi ride to the Meridian Spire was filled with her nervous chatter. She recited the names of the people she hoped to see, the executives she wanted to impress for her father's sake. She gave Liam a last-minute briefing, a list of do's and don'ts. Don't talk about your job unless someone asks, and if they do, just say you're in architectural design. It sounds better than draftsman. Don't just stand in a corner, try to mingle, and for God's sake, smile. Look like you're happy to be here. I'll do my best, he said, his voice a low murmur. The Meridian Spire rose from the heart of the city like a shard of obsidian and light. It was a twisting, soaring tower of black steel and glass, a building that seemed to defy gravity. It was the most audacious and celebrated piece of architecture the city had seen in a generation, and it was his. From the grand, sweeping lines of its facade to the precise calibration of the HVAC system, every inch of it had come from his mind. As their taxi pulled up to the grand entrance, past a fleet of luxury cars, Liam felt as if he were coming home. The lobby was a cathedral of modern design. A soaring three-story atrium was dominated by a cascading waterfall that flowed over a wall of polished granite. The air hummed with the sound of hundreds of conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. The cream of the city's society was there, draped in jewels and designer clothes. Clara's hand tightened on his arm, her knuckles white. "Okay," she breathed, her eyes wide as she took it all in. "Here we go." Her parents were already there, holding court near the entrance. Richard, resplendent in a tuxedo that seemed a size too small for his ego, was clapping a city councilman on the back. Eleanor was engaged in a hushed, intense conversation with a woman dripping in diamonds. They spotted Clara and waved them over. "There you are," Richard boomed, his eyes immediately flicking over Liam's tuxedo with a look of grudging approval. "Managed to find a decent monkey suit, I see. Good." He turned his attention back to the room. "What a place, huh? The man who built this is a genius, an absolute genius. They say he's a complete recluse. Nobody knows who he is. They call him L.M. Hayes, probably some old money eccentric." Liam just smiled. Eleanor glided over. "Clara, you must come and meet Beatrice Vandermeer. Her family practically owns the financial district. And try not to let your husband wander off and embarrass you." She said it with a thin smile, as if it were a light-hearted joke, but her eyes were cold as steel. For the next hour, Liam was a ghost. Clara, swept up by her mother, moved through the glittering crowd, laughing, networking, shining. Liam was left in her wake, an inconvenient shadow. He was ignored, overlooked. At one point, a waiter, mistaking him for a fellow staff member, tried to hand him a tray of empty glasses. Liam simply took the tray and placed it on a nearby table without a word. He saw Clara see the exchange from across the room, a flash of pure horror on her face before she quickly turned away, pretending she hadn't noticed. This was the peak of his humiliation. To be invisible in the very building that was the single greatest expression of his soul. He didn't feel anger. He felt a profound sense of release. He had reached the bottom. There was nowhere to go but up. He drifted away from the crowd toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city lights. He stood there for a long time, just watching the river of headlights, the glittering tapestry of a million lives. He felt a presence beside him. It was Marcus Thorne, looking elegant and sharp in a dark blue tuxedo. "Quite a view," Marcus said, handing him a glass of champagne. "I designed it to be," Liam replied with a small smile. "The board is getting restless," Marcus said in a low voice. "They're all here dying to meet the mysterious L.M. Hayes. Richard Sterling has been particularly aggressive, trying to find out who you are. He cornered me for 10 minutes, going on about how he wants to lease the top 5 floors." "My father-in-law," Liam said dryly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Ah, That explains a lot. Theatrics aside, Liam, the real introduction needs to happen soon. The mayor is here. The press is here. I know, it's almost time, Liam said. He looked across the room and saw his wife standing with her parents. She was laughing at something Richard said, but her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for someone important, someone who could elevate her. Her gaze passed right over Liam, not even registering him. He pulled a simple, elegant envelope from the inside pocket of his tuxedo. It was crisp and white, bearing the subtle, embossed logo of the Meridian Spire. "This is it, Marcus," Liam said, his voice firm. "This is the moment. Let the show begin." The moment for the main presentation arrived. The string quartet quieted, and a distinguished-looking man, the chairman of the Children's Hospital, stepped up to a podium on a low stage. He spoke about the charity, the importance of the new hospital wing, and thanked the attendees for their generosity. Then he smiled. "And now," he said, his voice resonating through the suddenly silent atrium, "I want to extend a special thank you to our host for this evening. As you know, the Meridian Spire is the talk of the city, a true masterpiece of design and engineering, and it is my great honor to introduce, for the very first time publicly, the visionary architect and owner of this incredible building. A man who, until now, has preferred to remain behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. L.M. Hayes." A wave of expectant murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone looked toward the wings of the stage, anticipating the arrival of some mythic, powerful figure. Clara, standing with her parents, was on her tiptoes, craning her neck to get a better view. Her face was alight with anticipation. This was it, the moment she would finally be in the same room as true power. Liam did not move toward the stage. Instead, he began to walk calmly and deliberately from his place by the window, through the center of the crowd. People turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion. He was just that guy, the one in the plain tuxedo, the one who had been standing alone by the window. What was he doing? He saw Clara's face as he passed her. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Her eyes widened, a silent, desperate plea. "What are you doing? Go back, sit down, you're making a scene." Her mother, Eleanor, looked aghast, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of theatrical horror. Richard's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. Liam ignored them. He walked past the rows of stunned faces, past the city's most powerful and influential people, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room. He didn't stop until he reached the podium. The chairman, looking utterly bewildered, stepped aside as Liam took his place. For a moment he just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting every eye in the room fix upon him. He looked out at the sea of faces, a mosaic of confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension. Finally, his eyes found Clara. She was frozen, a statue of disbelief, her hands still clutching a champagne flute. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone. It carried to every corner of the atrium. "My name is Liam Hayes." He paused, letting his name settle in the air. He saw the flicker of recognition on some faces, the ones who knew him as Clara's quiet, unassuming husband. "Some of you know me as that, Liam Hayes, but the chairman was correct. I have for the last few years preferred to go by a different name in my professional life." He looked directly at Richard, whose jaw had gone slack. "L.M. Hayes. The L is for Liam, the M is for Michael, my middle name. It's a pleasure to finally welcome you all to my building." A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a physical thing, a wave of sound and shock. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the fallout was instantaneous. The whispers started, first a trickle, then a flood. "That's him? Clara's husband? The draftsman?" Liam held up a hand, and the room fell silent again. "I know this may come as a surprise to some," he said, his gaze sweeping over Eleanor and Richard, who looked as if they'd been turned to stone. For the last 2 years, I have been living a quiet life. I sold my previous firm, Hayes Architecture, a name some of you might recognize, and I wanted to see what life was like without the title, without the prestige. I wanted to see what it was like to be valued for who I was, not for what I had. His eyes locked onto Clara's again. He was speaking only to her now, though the whole world was listening. It was an interesting experiment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The theatrical naturalism of his calm delivery was more devastating than any shout. He was simply stating facts, holding up the moral mirror. My father-in-law, Richard Sterling, he continued, gesturing politely toward the man, often likes to say that a man's worth is in what he builds. He's a man who appreciates ambition. He once asked me if my plan was to just draw my little lines and boxes forever. Liam smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Well, Richard, I suppose in a way you were right. I have been drawing lines and boxes. This one, he said, sweeping his arm out to encompass the magnificent space around them, is my biggest one yet. I hope it meets with your approval. The parallel structure was complete. The insult had been returned, not as an attack, but as a devastating, irrefutable statement of fact. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. His face, once florid with self-importance, was now pale and clammy. My wife, Liam said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its power, worried that she had married down, that her husband lacked ambition. He could see the tears welling in Clara's eyes, the complete and utter devastation dawning on her face. This was not the triumph she had dreamed of. This was a nightmare from which she could not awaken. I hope tonight puts those fears to rest. My only ambition for a very long time was to build a life with her. But a structure is only as strong as its foundation. And the foundation of our life, I have come to realize, was built on a misunderstanding. He paused, taking a breath. But that is a private matter. We are here tonight for a public good. He shifted gears seamlessly, his tone becoming warmer, more engaging. He began to speak about the children's hospital, about the importance of community, about building a better future. He was no longer the scorned husband. He was the visionary philanthropist, the leader, the man in charge. He spoke with an eloquence and passion that held the room spellbound. As he spoke, Marcus Thorne stepped forward and handed a file to the chairman and the mayor. The press, sensing the monumental nature of the story, began snapping photos, their flashes like lightning in the stunned room. When Liam finished his speech, there was a moment of absolute silence, and then the room erupted in thunderous applause. It was a tidal wave of approval, of admiration, of respect. The very people whose acceptance Clara had so desperately craved were now giving her husband a standing ovation. He stepped down from the podium and was immediately engulfed. The mayor was shaking his hand. Business tycoons were clapping him on the back. The woman with the diamonds, Beatrice Vandermeer, was looking at him with a predatory gleam in her eye. He was the center of the universe, the sun around which everyone now orbited. Through the crowd he could see her, Clara, still frozen in the same spot, the champagne flute having slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Her silver dress, once a symbol of her hopes, now seemed like a suit of armor that had been pierced through the heart. Her parents were beside her, looking lost and small, their social currency having just been declared worthless. She took a hesitant step toward him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Liam, she mouthed, but her voice was lost in the din. He met her gaze for one last, long moment. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, profound sorrow for what they had lost and what could never be regained. Then he turned away, back to the crowd, back to his new reality, leaving her alone in the ruins of the world she thought she wanted. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. As Liam was being congratulated by a senator and the city's chief of police, he saw, from the corner of his eye, the Sterling family imploding. Richard, his face a mask of gray fury and humiliation, grabbed Eleanor's arm and was dragging her toward the exit, hissing something in her ear. They moved with the furtive haste of disgraced courtiers fleeing a palace coup. They didn't even look at their daughter. Clara remained, a solitary island in the swirling sea of the party. People gave her a wide berth. The same people who had been air-kissing her an hour ago now looked through her, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was no longer the beautiful, well-connected Clara Sterling. She was the woman who had not known who her own husband was. The woman who had, in the most public way imaginable, been proven a fool. She tried to push through the crowd toward Liam, her movements clumsy, desperate. "Liam!" she called out, her voice thin and reedy. "Liam, please!" He heard her. Everyone heard her. But he was surrounded, a fortress of influence and power. Marcus, ever the loyal guardian, intercepted her before she could reach him. He spoke to her in a low, gentle voice, but his stance was firm, an immovable object. Liam could not hear the words, but he saw Clara's shoulders slump in defeat. She looked at Liam one last time, her eyes pleading for a sign, a glance, anything. He gave her nothing. He turned his attention back to the mayor, his expression polite, engaged, and utterly unreadable. It was the most brutal thing he had ever done. Defeated, Clara turned and stumbled toward the grand entrance, her silver dress now looking like a tattered flag of surrender. The magnificent atrium, which had seemed like a gateway to her dreams, was now the scene of her greatest shame. An hour later, when the initial frenzy had died down, Liam excused himself. He walked not toward the main entrance, but toward a private elevator bank concealed behind a wall of dark wood paneling. Marcus met him there. "Your car is waiting in the private garage," Marcus said, his face a mixture of admiration and concern. "And a driver has taken your wife home, to the apartment." "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Are you heading to the penthouse?" Liam shook his head. "Not tonight. I have one more stop to make." The private garage was silent and cool. Waiting for him was not the 10-year-old sedan, but a gleaming, midnight blue Aston Martin DB11. It was a piece of automotive sculpture, radiating power even at a standstill. It was his real car, the one that had been in climate-controlled storage for 2 years. He slid into the driver's seat. The smell of rich leather filled his senses. He started the engine, and it roared to life with a deep, throaty growl, the sound of unleashed power. He drove out of the garage and into the city night. He didn't drive fast. He moved through the streets with a slow, deliberate grace, the city lights reflecting off the car's polished hood. He was not heading for the penthouse suite at the top of his magnificent tower. He was not heading for a celebratory drink at an exclusive club. He drove back to the unremarkable 3-story walk-up building where he had lived his lie. He parked the Aston Martin directly in front of the entrance, under the single, buzzing street lamp. It looked like a spaceship that had landed on the wrong planet. He got out and looked up at the window of their apartment. The lights were on. She was in there. He imagined her, alone in the small rooms that now must feel like a prison. He imagined her replaying the night, her mind reeling from the shock, the shame, the confusion. He could go up there. He could confront her. He could demand an apology. He could offer forgiveness. But he did none of those things. The time for words was over. Tonight was about symbols. He had made his public statement. This was his private one. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, a silent sentinel by his magnificent car, a stark, visual representation of the man she had never bothered to see. Then he got back in the car and drove away, the sound of the powerful engine fading into the night, leaving behind only the lingering image of what she had lost. He was driving toward his real life, leaving her behind in the ruins of theirs. The days that followed were a study in silence and consequence. Liam moved into the penthouse suite at the Meridian Spire. It was a space he had designed for himself, a sanctuary of clean lines, natural materials, and breathtaking views. It was quiet, peaceful, and empty. He spent his days in meetings, fielding offers, directing projects, stepping fully back into the life he had put on hold. He was L.M. Hayes now, in public and in private. The simple draftsman, Liam, had been a role he had played, and the curtain had come down. He heard nothing from Clara. He heard, through Marcus, that her parents had gone into social seclusion. Richard's business was suddenly facing unforeseen regulatory hurdles, and several major clients had pulled their contracts, citing a desire to move in a different direction. The world that Richard had built on bluster and connections was proving to be a house of cards, and Liam's revelation had been the gust of wind that brought it all down. Clara, he learned, was still at the apartment. She had not gone running to her parents. Jessica Atherton, the friend who had gotten them the gala tickets, had called Marcus in a panic. Clara wasn't answering her phone. She hadn't left the apartment in days. A week after the gala, a package arrived for Liam. It was a simple, large manila envelope delivered by a courier. There was no return address. Inside, he found two things. The first was a key, the key to their apartment. The second was a letter, handwritten on simple, plain stationery. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Liam," it began. There were no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to deflect blame. It was the most honest thing he had ever received from her. "I have spent the last week in this apartment, surrounded by the life we had, the life I held in such contempt. I keep looking at the bookshelves you built, the floors you sanded. I remember you doing it. I remember you were happy. I thought it was because you were simple. I realize now it was because you were free. I don't know how to apologize for the things I said, the things I thought, the person I became. Sorry is a word for spilling coffee, not for destroying a marriage. The shame I feel is absolute. It is not the shame of being embarrassed publicly. It is the deep, cellular shame of knowing I failed. I failed you, and I failed myself. I looked at you, my husband, the man who was kind and patient and good, and I saw nothing. I was blind. I was blinded by the shallow, glittering world my parents worshipped. That night at the gala, you gave me what I deserved. You held up a mirror, and the reflection was ugly, and it was me. I hate that person. I don't want to be her anymore. I am not writing this to ask you to take me back. I have no right to ask for anything. I am writing this to thank you, not for the money or the success I never knew you had, but for the lesson. It is the most painful and valuable gift I have ever received. You showed me what true worth is, and you showed me that I had none of it. I am leaving the apartment. I will be staying with my sister in another state. I need to figure out who I am without my parents' money or my husband's name. I need to build something of my own, something real. Maybe for the first time in my life. The woman you married is gone. I hope one day to become a woman worthy of the man I was married to. It was signed, simply, Clara. Liam read the letter 3 times. He felt the cold knot of anger and hurt that had been sitting in his chest for weeks finally begin to loosen. This was not the groveling plea for forgiveness he had expected. This was growth. It was the beginning of a painful, genuine redemption. He walked over to the vast window of his penthouse and looked down at the city. It spread out before him, a kingdom of his own making. But it felt hollow. He had won. He had achieved his vindication. But he was alone. He had wanted justice, but he had never truly wanted to destroy her. He had wanted to awaken her, and it seemed in the most brutal way possible he had succeeded. He picked up his phone and made a call. Not to Clara, not yet. He called a small, independent design-build firm in Oregon, a place known for its focus on sustainable, community-oriented projects. "Hello," he said when the owner answered. "My name is Liam Hayes. I'm an architect, and I've heard you're looking for some help. I'm good with lines and boxes, and I'm looking for a project that's grounding." He didn't need another tower. He had already built his monument. What he needed now was to build a life. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Liam did not move to Oregon, but he did invest heavily in that small firm, acting as a silent partner and mentor, guiding them from afar. The story of L.M. Hayes and his dramatic revelation at the Meridian Spire became a city legend, a modern fable about hidden worth and poetic justice. He ran his empire with a quiet competence, but he kept a deliberate distance from the glittering social world that had once been Clara's obsession. He found his satisfaction not in the galas and headlines, but in the quiet hum of his business, in the act of creation itself. He heard through Marcus that Richard and Eleanor had sold their cavernous house and retired to Florida, their social standing in their old city permanently erased. Their empire had crumbled, as Liam knew it would. It had no foundation. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam was walking through a public park near his building, a sketchbook in hand, a new one, not the old, symbol-laden journal. He was sketching the way the late afternoon light hit the turning leaves on an old oak tree when he saw her. It was Clara. She was sitting on a bench reading a book. She looked different. Her hair was simpler. Her clothes were tasteful but understated. The brittle, high-strung energy was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness that reminded him of the girl he had first met. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and he thought she had never looked more beautiful. He almost turned away. He told himself it was better to leave the past in the past, but his feet seemed to have a will of their own. He walked toward her, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. She looked up as his shadow fell over her, and her eyes widened. There was no fear in them, no shame, just a quiet, startled recognition. "Liam," she said, her voice soft. "Hello, Clara." They looked at each other for a long moment, an entire lifetime of shared history, of love and pain and misunderstanding, passed between them in that silent gaze. "I heard you were back in the city," he said finally, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. "May I?" She nodded and he sat down, leaving a respectable distance between them. "My sister's wedding is next month," she explained. "I'm just here for a few weeks to help. I'm working, by the way, at a nonprofit. We help build community gardens in low-income neighborhoods. It's grounding." She said the word with a small, self-aware smile. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement. He saw her hands. Her nails were not perfectly manicured anymore. There was a smudge of dirt under one of them. She had been building something. "That sounds wonderful," he said, and he meant it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the people in the park. Families playing, couples walking, students studying. It was a scene of simple, ordinary life. The kind of life she had once scorned, and he now cherished. "The letter you wrote," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "It meant a great deal." She looked down at the book in her lap. "I meant every word. I had to lose everything, Liam, to realize what was actually important. I spent so many years trying to measure up to a standard that was worthless. My parents, they taught me how to acquire, but not how to value." "And now?" he asked gently. She looked up and her eyes were clear and direct. "Now I'm learning to value things differently. Integrity, kindness, a quiet afternoon in the park." She paused. "Respect, the kind you earn, not the kind you demand." This was the core of it, the moral of their long, painful story. True worth is not in what you own or who you know. It's in who you are when nobody is looking. It's in your character, your integrity, your ability to see the value in others, even when it is not publicly displayed. He had set out to teach her a lesson, to claim his vindication. But somewhere along the way, he had learned something too. He had learned that victory could be a lonely prize. He had demolished the flawed structure of their marriage, but he had never stopped loving the woman who was trapped inside it. And now, here she was, changed, rebuilt from the foundation up. "I'm glad you're back, Clara," he said. A genuine smile touched her lips, a real one that reached her eyes. "Me too." He didn't ask her to dinner. He didn't suggest they try again. It was too soon for that. The wounds were deep, And trust, once shattered, is the most difficult thing to rebuild. But as he stood up to leave, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. "Maybe I'll see you around the park again," he said. It was a question, not a statement. "Maybe you will," she replied. He walked away, not looking back. The story wasn't over. A resolution had begun, but the final chapter was yet to be written. It would not be a dramatic reunion or a fairy tale ending. It would be something quieter, more patient. It would be built slowly, carefully, day by day, on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. It would be a structure designed to last. What do you think? Is redemption possible after such a deep betrayal of trust? Can a person truly change, or do they just learn to play a different role? It's a question we all face in our own lives, in our own relationships. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives are what make this community so incredible. And if you've made it this far, thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about life's unexpected turns and the quiet strength it takes to navigate them. Until next time, remember to look beyond the surface. The most valuable things are often the ones that are hidden in plain sight.